Well, hi everyone, and welcome to today's Tech Talk. My name is Jeff Bartley, and I'm a solutions architect on the AWS DataSync service team. I'm really excited to talk to you today about AWS DataSync and how it's helping so many of our AWS customers to migrate and protect their on-premises data in the cloud. I work with a lot of customers who are looking to move their data into AWS. Some of my customers are moving their data because their on-premises data centers are closing and they need to get data into AWS quickly. Other customers are migrating their applications to run on EC2 or our container services, or maybe they're even converting to a serverless model with AWS Lambda, and they need to bring their application data with them. Still, other of my customers are moving shared file systems into the cloud to take advantage of the high durability, massive scalability, and low cost that AWS storage services provide. But regardless of why they're moving, what I commonly find is that my customers often need to move a lot of data, and they need to move it quickly and securely. Now, transferring a few files here and there is pretty easy to do. But when you start looking at copying large amounts of data, there are a lot of factors to consider. Many customers initially look at using do-it-yourself tools, which can make sense because many of these tools are free. It's also possible to write your own tools to do this on your own, but it takes a significant amount of work. Tools that may initially appear to be free can actually cost enterprises a lot of money and time when applied to larger scale migrations. Most importantly, you don't want to find out the files that took hours or days to transfer were corrupted or lost in some way, especially when you have a tight project timeline. So after hearing from our customers about some of the challenges they were facing with trying to transfer and migrate their data into AWS, we realized that there was an opportunity to help them by removing a lot of the undifferentiated heavy lifting that comes with building your own migration tools. So we built AWS DataSync, which is a fully managed service for online transfer of data between on-premises storage and AWS storage services. DataSync is built to be fast, secure, reliable, easy to use and manage, as well as cost-effective. So looking at our agenda for today, we'll start by doing an introduction to the AWS DataSync service, its features and its capabilities, and how it works. We'll then review how our customers are using DataSync, going through 4 key use cases. From there, we'll go into a demo where I'll show you how easy it is to migrate data from your on-premises storage to Amazon S3, which is one of the cloud storage services that DataSync supports. We'll then close up by reviewing some best practices, and then I'll give you some pointers on how to get started with the service. So let's talk about an introduction to DataSync. So how do you use DataSync? For a lot of our customers, they often start with copying data between their on-premises storage and AWS storage services. DataSync supports Amazon S3, EFS, or FSx for Windows File Server. DataSync agents are used to connect to on-premises storage through your local network using common storage protocols. Now, earlier this year, we launched AWS Snowcone, which is a rugged, portable, small form factor storage and compute device weighing in at just 4.5 pounds with 8 terabytes of usable storage. Snowcone helps customers collect, process, and transfer data outside of traditional data centers. Each Snowcone device ships with the DataSync agent built in, allowing customers to copy their data directly into AWS without having to ship the unit back. Using the embedded DataSync agent, you can copy data from your Snowcone device to S3, EFS, or FSx or Windows File Server for further processing or long-term storage in the cloud. Many of our customers are also using DataSync entirely within AWS to transfer data between our storage services. I have customers that are using DataSync today to make an additional copy of their EFS or FSx file systems in other regions, or to copy data between their managed file systems in S3 for additional cloud processing in analytics or machine learning workloads, for example. And just recently, we announced support for Amazon S3 on Outposts, which allows Outposts customers to use S3 APIs to store and retrieve data in the same way that they would access or use data in a regular AWS region. Using DataSync, customers can copy data between their local Outposts S3 storage and their in-region S3 buckets. So how does DataSync work? For transfers to or from on-premises storage, you begin by deploying one or more DataSync agents into your on-premises environment. Agents are virtual machines that run in VMware, Hyper-V, or KVM environments. DataSync agents can also be deployed on EC2 instances, running either in AWS or on Outposts. A single agent can transfer data at up to 10 gigabits per second of throughput, and you can add more agents to run faster. Once the agents have been deployed and activated, you can then configure DataSync locations, which tell the service how to connect to supported storage systems. On premises, DataSync supports connecting to shared file systems using the NFS or SMB protocols, as well as object storage systems that have S3 API compatible interfaces. In AWS, DataSync can connect directly to Amazon S3, Amazon EFS, or Amazon FSx for Windows File Server. DataSync uses tasks to transfer data, and each task has a source location and a destination location. DataSync always copies data from the source to the destination. In AWS, DataSync runs as a fully managed service, coordinating access to AWS storage services and managing data transfers from on-premises. For transfers between on-premises and AWS, DataSync can transfer data over the internet through an AWS Direct Connect link or using VPN connections. As I mentioned earlier, all data is encrypted in flight using TLS. So why are customers using DataSync? Performance is of critical importance to any migration tool, and DataSync has been built for speed. DataSync utilizes compression, parallel transfer, and other optimizations to get your data to the cloud as fast as possible. DataSync uses a purpose-built network protocol and a parallel multi-threaded architecture to accelerate your transfers. This speeds up migrations, recurring data processing workflows for analytics and machine learning, and data protection processes. We also wanted to make DataSync easy to use by allowing customers to get up and running quickly, focusing on the task of getting their data to the cloud. Customers can centrally manage DataSync configuration tasks like scheduling, filtering, and bandwidth throttling directly from the AWS console or using the CLI or the API. DataSync is built to transfer data securely and reliably. DataSync encrypts data in flight and supports encryption at rest. It also provides a number of options for validating your data, making sure that all data was transferred successfully. DataSync can transfer data securely over the internet, or for customers that need additional levels of security or compliance, we also provide VPC and FIPS endpoints. The DataSync transport protocol was also built to recover automatically from common network issues, such as reconnects and drop connections. DataSync is managed centrally from the AWS console and integrates with many common AWS services such as CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and others. DataSync is also optimized for working with AWS storage services. For example, using DataSync, you can copy data directly to any S3 storage class without the need for lifecycle policies. Lastly, you can move data cost-effectively with DataSync's flat per gigabyte pricing. You only pay for the data transferred, and there are no minimums. You'll also save on the costs of script development and management costs for do-it-yourself tools and avoiding the need for costly commercial transfer tools. So as I mentioned previously, DataSync is deeply integrated with a number of AWS services. DataSync can transfer data over the internet or use AWS Direct Connect for secure connectivity directly from your data center. DataSync also provides VPC endpoints, making it easier to connect to AWS services from within your private networks. Management and monitoring, DataSync integrates with Amazon CloudWatch for logging and events, as well as AWS CloudTrail for logging API access to the service. DataSync integrates with IAM through the use of roles and security policies, and DataSync is optimized for working with a wide variety of AWS storage services. DataSync is available in 22 AWS regions around the world, including both GovCloud East and West in the United States. This year, we added support for the Milan and Cape Town regions in Europe and South Africa, respectively, and will continue adding support for new regions as they come online. So now let's talk about some of the use cases that our customers are using DataSync for. First, many of our customers use DataSync for migration of application data. Customers find it difficult to move data sets that are constantly changing. You can't take the data set offline to migrate it, so they need a tool to move this active data. DataSync detects changes at the source, so it knows what has already been moved and what hasn't. Second, DataSync works well for customers who are looking to free up on-premises storage. A lot of file data out there is not accessed too often. Customers are finding they can save money by moving that data off of expensive Tier 1 storage systems. Customers can use DataSync to move that data into the cloud, where it can be stored durably and reliably, allowing them to free up or even shut down their on-premises storage. A third use case is where customers want to replicate their on-premises data into the cloud for added data protection and recovery in the case of a disaster. This could be a one-time copy, or it could be an ongoing continuous replication. Finally, a fourth use case relates to moving data to the cloud for processing, whether it's customers running media workflows, doing analysis of autonomous vehicle data, processing seismic data, or analyzing genome sequences. DataSync customers are using the AWS cloud to expand their ability to process and analyze large amounts of data. Now let's take a look at each of these use cases in more depth. You can use AWS DataSync to migrate from on-premises data centers to S3, EFS, and FSX for Windows File Server. DataSync will make an initial copy of your entire dataset, and subsequent incremental transfers of changing data can be scheduled to run periodically until the final cutover from on-premises to AWS. DataSync includes encryption and integrity validation to help make sure data arrives securely, intact, and ready to use. To minimize impact on other workloads that rely on the same network connection, you can schedule the migration to run during off hours or limit the amount of network bandwidth that DataSync uses by configuring the built-in bandwidth throttle. You can also use DataSync to move cold data from expensive on-premises storage systems directly to durable and secure long-term storage, such as Amazon S3 Glacier or Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive. DataSync's filtering functionality can exclude copying temporary files and folders, or copy only a subset of files from your source location. You can select the most cost-effective storage service for your needs, transfer data to any S3 storage class, or use DataSync with EFS lifecycle management to store data in EFS infrequent access storage class. The built-in task scheduling functionality can be used to regularly archive data that should be retained for compliance or auditing purposes, such as logs, raw footage, or electronic medical records. Using DataSync, you can periodically replicate files into all Amazon S3 storage classes, or send the data to Amazon EFS or Amazon FSX for a standby file system. The built-in task scheduling functionality will ensure that changes to your dataset are regularly copied to the destination storage. You can also use DataSync to replicate data between AWS storage services, such as replicating managed file systems across AWS regions for multi-region data protection. Finally, you can use AWS DataSync to accelerate and schedule transfers from on-premises systems into or out of AWS for processing. DataSync can speed up critical hybrid cloud storage workflows in industries that need to move active files into AWS quickly, including video production and media and entertainment, seismic research in oil and gas, machine learning in life sciences, and big data analytics in finance. DataSync provides timely delivery to ensure dependent processes are not delayed. You can specify exclude filters, include filters, or both to determine which files, folders, or objects get transferred each time your task runs. Now, Autodesk was a DataSync customer, and they had the challenge that they had a data domain system in their on-premises data center that had multiple petabytes of data, and they were looking to retire the system. However, they had data retention policies that required that the data on this data domain system be retained for many years. Now, they really liked the value of Amazon S3, its low cost, its high durability, and its pay-as-you-go model, as well as its support for versioning. And so Autodesk utilized DataSync to move their data from their data domain system into S3 in just a matter of months. And they were able to successfully transfer that data into S3 with full byte-for-byte verification, giving them the confidence to know that their data was moved successfully. And shortly after that migration was done, Autodesk was able to decommission their on-premises data domain because their data was now safely in S3. In fact, they were so excited about the capabilities that DataSync gave them that they actually wrote a blog for us. And if you head out to our AWS storage blog, you can find the article that they wrote for us. Okay, and with that, let's go ahead and look at our demo scenario. So what we're going to do today in our demo scenario, we have an NFS file server and a DataSync agent that is going to help us copy the data off of that NFS file server and up into Amazon S3. And we're going to do this in 3 phases. In the first phase, we're going to do an initial migration of our data from our server up into S3. And I'm going to show you how you can use exclude filters to filter out data that you don't want to migrate or copy. We're then going to do a second run, and we're going to do an incremental copy of new data from NFS up to S3. And then finally, on our third run, I'm going to show you how you can use include filters to limit the scope of the data that needs to be transferred by DataSync. So with that, let me go ahead and hop over to my AWS console. And I've already deployed some resources in my environment that we'll use for this today. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I've deployed my agent, but I need to activate my agent in my region. You can see I'm in the Ohio region, so I'm going to click Get Started, and I want to deploy my agent in Ohio. I'm going to use a public endpoint. Remember that DataSync offers both public endpoints and VPC endpoints, but I'm going to use a public endpoint today. And I'm going to activate it using the IP address of my agent, which I have right here. I'm going to go ahead and copy that and paste it here, and I'm going to hit Get Key. And what's happening is that I'm going out and I'm talking to the agent right now, and I'm activating the agent in our Ohio region. And so you can see that the activation was successful. We got an activation key. And then I'm going to give my agent a name. I'm going to call it Demo Agent. And if I wanted to, I could apply tags. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and click Create Agent. It's created my agent. And I'll go over here and I just do a quick refresh. And we can see that my agent was created. It's got a public endpoint and it's online and ready to go. Okay, so Before I go ahead and create my DataSync task to copy the data, let me just show you some of the data that's on our NFS server. So right now I'm logged into my NFS server and I've got one export on here. This is in /media/data, and that's currently where I'm at. And in here, I've got a directory called demo1. And if I look inside of demo1, you can see I've got about 200 JPEG files, and I've got about 5 temp files. What I want to do is I want to migrate the JPEG files, but I want to ignore, or I don't want to migrate the temp files. So I'm going to show you how you can use Exclude Filters to do this with DataSync. So remember, my mount point here is /media/data, okay? And then as I mentioned earlier, we're gonna copy this data into S3, and I've pre-created an S3 bucket in my account. If I do a quick refresh here, you can see that the bucket is currently empty. There's nothing in it. So I'm gonna copy the data from my NFS server into S3, and I'm gonna show you how easy it is to do that using DataSync. So I'm going to click on tasks over here, and then I'm going to click create task, and I'm going to create a new task. So the first thing that you do is you define your source location. This is where you're copying your data from. In this case, I'm copying from an NFS server. And the first thing I want to do is specify which agent or agents, because I can select multiple if I had them, that I'm going to use to copy. I have the one agent that I just created, so I'm going to select that. And then I need to provide the IP address of my NFS server, which I have over here. So I'll grab that and I'll paste that into here. And then I need to give it the mount path. This is the mount point that the DataSync agent is going to use to access the NFS server. And if you remember, it was media/data, okay? So that's defined my source location. I defined the agent I'm going to use, the NFS server, the IP, how to contact the server, and then the path or the mount point that I use to actually access the data on the server. And I'll hit next. And so the next, now I need to configure my destination location. In this case, I'm going to S3. So I'm going to select S3 as my destination. I'm going to select the bucket that I want to use, which is this one here. And then I can specify which storage class that I want DataSync to copy my data into. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that DataSync can copy directly into any storage class, including Glacier or Glacier Deep Archive. I have a number of customers who use this capability because they're moving cold data, or maybe they're moving backup files or something that they don't need to touch. They just need to hold on to it for compliance purposes, and they want the low cost but high durability that Glacier or Glacier Deep Archive provide. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and use standard, which is the S3 standard storage class. And then I could select a prefix to copy into. I'm going to just copy into the top level of my bucket. And then the last thing that I need to do is I need to specify an IAM role. Now, this is the role that the DataSync service will assume to be able to actually access and copy data into the S3 bucket. I pre-created a role prior to our talk today, and I'm just going to go into here, and that's actually the name of the role is over here. It's DataSync Migration Workshop. I'll copy that. You can search for it there. There's my role that I pre-created to give me access, or to give the DataSync service access to my bucket. I'll click next. And then these are additional settings that I can set on my task. I'm going to give it a name. We're going to say demo 1, demo 1 task. Then I have some options that I can choose from. The first is how I want to verify my data. I have 3 options to choose from. I'm going to select that I want to verify the data that DataSync is going to transfer when it runs this task. I have options on how I want to copy file metadata. When you're copying from NFS locations, DataSync will copy POSIX metadata and place it into the user metadata portion of S3. And this metadata is actually compatible with other AWS services like Storage Gateway and FSx for Lustre. I'm just going to go ahead and keep this metadata in my objects. And then I also have choices around how DataSync is going to manage my files, whether I want to keep deleted files, whether I want to overwrite files. I'll just keep the defaults. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that DataSync gives you the ability to set bandwidth throttles, so you can control how much network bandwidth DataSync actually consumes. So I could put in here a limit of, let's say I wanted to limit it to 100 megabytes per second, I would put 100 here. In this case, I'm just going to use the bandwidth that's available. And then finally, DataSync will queue up multiple tasks on an agent, because an agent can only run one task at a time. So if I have queuing enabled, which it is by default, then if I run multiple tasks that utilize that agent, they'll be queued up and DataSync will automatically run those tasks as the current running task finishes. Okay, now let's talk about filtering here. So if you remember, I had some files on my NFS server that ended in .temp, and I want to filter those out. So I'm going to create a really simple filter, star.temp, and that will filter out just those temp files that I don't want to copy. I could add additional patterns if I wanted to, but that's the only one that I want to filter out. You can also schedule, you can actually set up a schedule for the DataSync task. So you could set it up to run hourly or daily or some other time, or you could even use like a custom cron tab entry to define how often you want it to run. In this case, I'm just going to run it once, so I'm not going to set a schedule on my task. And then finally, I'm going to configure CloudWatch about how I want to log and where I want to log the output of my task. So I'm going to log entries into a log group in CloudWatch. Okay, so I'll click next and I'll just review the settings on my task. My source is my NFS. I'm copying from /media/data, and I'm going into S3, into this bucket using this role that the DataSync service will assume. And then just look at the options here, make sure my filter is set up correctly. Everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click Create Task. And again, you can see that all the information about my task is here. All the options that I set, filters and task logging settings, etc. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and quickly refresh this page, and my DataSync task should be ready to go, which it is. And I'm going to go ahead and click Start. Now, every time I run a task, a DataSync task, I have the option of changing some of the task settings. For instance, I could change how I want to verify data or how I want to copy metadata, etc. In this case, I want to keep everything the same, and I'm going to go ahead and click Start. And that has started running, and so while we're going to let that run, I'm going to hop back over real quick to my presentation and talk about a few things here. So let's talk about filtering with exclude filters first. So you can use exclude filters to ignore file patterns or even to ignore entire file paths. You may have directories in there, for instance, that you don't want to copy. And you can have multiple patterns for each task. As DataSync scans the source storage, it applies the exclude filters to each file, folder, or object that it finds. Anything that matches the pattern is excluded from the transfer. And an important thing to remember is that exclude filters are configured when a task is created. And you can also change exclude filters when you're editing the task options. So for instance, if you realize that you needed additional filters or something like that in your task, you could go back and you could edit that task and add additional filters if you wanted to after the task had been created. Now let's also talk about include filters while we're here. So include filters are different from exclude filters in that they're used to narrow the scope of a particular task execution. Unlike exclude filters, include filters are only specified when you run a task. And I'm going to show you how you can do this later. But they allow you and you can change include filters each time you run a task. And when you run a task, DataSync evaluates the include filters and it only copies the specific folders or files that match the filter. Okay, all right, so let's hop back and see the status of our task. Okay, and you can see that it's still in the launching phase, so we'll give it just a few seconds here. Okay, so we can see that our task has successfully finished. Just took a short time to copy that data, and you can see it says that 202 files were transferred. If you remember, we had 200 JPEG files in that demo1 directory. So what are those extra 2 there? Well, in addition to copying metadata for files in the file data, DataSync also copies metadata about folders and parent folders. So in this case, the extra 2 there are the demo1 folder and the metadata on the parent folder itself. So that's why it says 202. You can see what our file throughput was, how many files were being transferred per second, and the data throughput. In this case, it wasn't a lot of data, and it moved pretty quickly, so we have generally low throughput. You would see larger throughput with more files and with larger files in general. But with that, let's go ahead and head over to our S3 bucket, and let's go ahead and refresh this. Okay, so now we can see at the top level of our bucket, we can see our demo1 folder. Because we copied from /media/data, it's going to copy everything that was underneath that folder. And if I go into the demo1 folder, you can see that 200 files are listed here. These are all of my JPEG files, and none of the .temp files were copied over. We excluded those out using that exclude filter. Okay, so now for the next step, what I want to do is typically, when you do a migration, typically you're often doing it from a live file system. And so new data is being added to that file system as you go. So here I've got my demo1 directory. I'm going to make a new directory called demo2, and I'm going to copy some files from the demo1 directory into demo2. So I'm going to copy demo1/0000 star to demo2. If I look at demo2, you can see that I've got 9 JPEG files in there. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to do an incremental transfer. That means that I want DataSync to only copy the new data. So this is actually pretty simple. All I have to do is go to DataSync, go back to my task, hit start, review my settings, and click start again. So wow, that's super simple. So let me talk to you about how DataSync works and why it makes incremental transfers so simple. So DataSync goes through 4 key stages when it runs each task. The first stage is the launching phase. So during this phase, the DataSync managed service is launching infrastructure to execute the task execution. This phase typically takes a few minutes or less. The second phase is what is called the preparing phase. And during this phase, DataSync scans the source and the destination in parallel, gathering an inventory of files on both sides of the transfer. This is the phase during which filters are applied to either include or exclude specific files or folders. The purpose of the preparing phase is to determine the difference between the source and the destination and to only transfer the files or folders that differ. So in our case, the first time we ran our DataSync task, there was no data in the S3 bucket. DataSync got to the preparing phase, it scanned the source, it found the 200 JPEG files, it scanned the destination, it saw that there was nothing in there, and it said, okay, I need to copy those 200 JPEG files from NFS to S3. The second time that we're running DataSync now, what's going to happen? Well, DataSync, again, is going to scan the source, NFS. This time it's going to see the demo1 folder with the 200 JPEG files, and it's going to see the demo2 folder that we just created, and its 9 JPEG files. But on the destination side on the S3 bucket, DataSync is also going to scan it, and what it's going to find is it's going to find the demo1 folder that was already previously copied. And it's going to look and it's going to compare with the source, and it's going to say, hey, I've already got files that have been copied. There's no reason to copy those again. I'm only going to copy the new data, which in this case is the data in the demo2 folder. So in that way, DataSync is always doing incremental copies. Now, once the prepare phase is complete, DataSync then has a set of files to be transferred from the source to the destination. To optimize network bandwidth, data is compressed in flight where possible, and all data is encrypted in flight using TLS. Checksums are also computed at the source before the data is sent, and the checksums are validated before the data is written to the destination. After all the files have been transferred, DataSync will then move into the verify phase if the task was configured for additional verification, which we did set on our task. So if you remember, we set it to verify all files transferred. During this phase, DataSync will verify that the data and metadata were written properly to the destination storage. So let's go back and check out our task. We can see that it finished, again, pretty quickly. You can see that this time only 11 files were transferred. Again, this is the 9 JPEG files plus the additional metadata and timestamps related to the directories that have changed. And if we go to our bucket, and we go up to the top level of that bucket, and we do a refresh, we now see our demo2 folder was copied, and we have just our 9 JPEG files. Again, super easy. I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was rerun my existing task, and it just picked up the new data that was created. Okay, so now let's go ahead, and now what I want to do is I want to show you how you can use include filters to narrow the scope of the task each time you run a task. So we've got our demo1 and demo2 folder. I'm going to create a third folder. So let's create a demo3 folder. And I'm going to copy some files, again, from demo1 /000 star to demo3 this time. And then I also want to copy some of those the temp files as well, just to show you that the exclude filter and the include filter work together. So we'll do file star to demo3. And if I do an ls in my demo3 directory, you can see that we now have 99 JPEG files in there, and we've got 5 temporary files in there, okay? So what I want to do this time, because sometimes you'll have cases where you have to copy a lot of data, but a lot of that data you may have already transferred, and you just want to tell DataSync, hey, just copy this one location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my task again, but I'm going to use an include filter to just copy demo3. So we'll go back to DataSync, and again, I'm just going to rerun my task. I'm going to hit start. And if you remember what I said earlier about include filters, you create include filters at the time that you execute a task. So in this case, I'm going to set an include filter of /demo3 /star. And what I'm doing is that pattern is relative to the directory on my source. So in other words, DataSync is going to append this to whatever I put as my mount point for NFS, which if you remember, we added /media/data. So the path that we're going to use is /media/data demo3, and then we're going to copy everything in that folder. And I'm going to go ahead and hit start. And again, that task is launching. And so we'll go back and we'll talk about one more slide here. So this workflow of utilizing include filters is common with a lot of customers that I work with that use DataSync. In fact, I've recently been working with a life sciences customer that has a number of genome sequencers on premises. And these sequencers are running jobs on a daily basis and generating a lot of data, tens or hundreds of gigabytes of data per day, and storing them in an on-premises NAS system. Now, this data continues to accumulate. The sequencer, every time the sequencer runs, it writes data into a job folder, and that job folder has a unique ID that also happens to have a timestamp associated with it. And every night, my customer wants to copy this data from their on-premises NAS up into S3, where they'll do additional processing on it. They do additional levels of analysis and processing on their data. They don't have a processing environment on premises, so they're utilizing the cloud to do their additional processing. Now, every night when they run DataSync, they don't want to copy all the data that they've copied on previous days. They only want to copy the new data that's been generated. So what they did was they created 3 tasks, one per each of their sequencers, because all their sequencer data is going to different top-level folders. And then what they did is they went ahead and they created a CloudWatch event that triggers on a nightly basis to upload the data sets that were generated just for that day. And that CloudWatch event kicks off a Lambda function that my customer wrote that applies an include filter to the task for that sequencer. And so it uses the timestamps that are on the job directories to filter out everything except for jobs that ran that day. So using this, my customer is able to transfer data very quickly up into the cloud and make it available for processing without churning through all the existing data that they are continuing to accumulate in their on-premises NAS. And so we're doing something similar in our demo right now. So let's switch back and see the status of our demo. Okay, and you can see that we finished. And again, if we look at the files transferred, if you remember, there were 99 JPEG files in that demo3 folder, right? So we copied those 99 files, and again, the metadata for the demo3 folder as well as the parent folder. And if we go back to S3 and we go up to the root of the bucket and we do a refresh, we can see the demo3 folder is in there. And you can see there's 99 files. So those 99 JPEG files are copied, but not the .temp files. So not only did we utilize an include filter this time to narrow the scope of our copy just to the demo3 folder, but the exclude filter was still working. It was still filtering out those .temp files. So now we've shown you how you can use exclude and include filters together. Okay, and then the last thing that I wanted to show you was how DataSync does some of its task logging. So we'll click on here and we'll go to CloudWatch to take a look at our task logs. Okay, so I'm in CloudWatch and you can see that DataSync has generated 3 log streams, one for each of the tasks that I run. And what I wanted to show you is if I click on this one, this was the second one where we just transferred a few files. You can see here that when I configured my task, I told DataSync to log not only any errors or warnings that might come up, but also to do more verbose logging, to log files that were transferred and files that were verified. So you can see, if you remember, we copied 9 JPEG files, and you can see those listed, and it also lists what file was transferred and how big it was, as well as when it was verified, and again, what the size was when it was verified. So I have a number of customers who are using this to kind of create a log of their transfers and to store these as a way to give them that added measure of comfort and knowing that their data was transferred successfully. All right, and with that, let's jump back over to our slides and let's just finish up by talking about some best practices when you're using DataSync. So first, always remember that when you're planning your transfers, DataSync is an online transfer service, always plan your transfers using available network bandwidth. Sometimes I'll work with customers who have 10 gigabit per second network connections to AWS, but only a portion of that bandwidth is available for DataSync to use. Since network bandwidth affects how long it takes to transfer data, make sure to plan using only what's available. Also remember that you can throttle DataSync tasks to use less bandwidth, so as not to take away bandwidth from other applications or processes that are using the same network. Second, it's really important to always perform test runs to validate your assumptions before you start the full transfer. I think all of us have probably been in this situation where we kicked off a data transfer only to come back a few days later to realize we had missed a step, and now we need to retransfer the data all over again. You can avoid that by starting with some small DataSync tasks using include filters if needed to limit the scope, and then you can build up from there. Third, remember that the size of the files being transferred will affect how much throughput you'll get from your task. Small files have more overhead per I/O operation than large files, and the number of files that can be processed per second will vary from storage system to storage system. If you're transferring primarily small files, then look more at the files per second metric rather than throughput. Fourth, to get more performance, remember that you can scale out by using multiple agents. Sometimes I'll work with customers who have a lot of available bandwidth, but because of the average size of the files being transferred, a single task can't fill their network pipe. In that case, I'll usually help them to find a way to run multiple tasks in parallel, often by partitioning their storage or by transferring multiple volumes or file shares at the same time using different tasks for each one. Finally, if you're copying to EFS or FSX for Windows File Server file systems, remember that each one of those can be configured for specific provision throughput levels. You may want to use a higher provision throughput during the initial migration and then lower it if needed after the migration is complete. All right, so let's talk about how you get started to use DataSync. So using DataSync, as you've seen through our demo, is pretty simple. You start by downloading and deploying an agent and activating it in your AWS region. You create or select your source and your destination locations and you create your task. And then you run your task and you can monitor it using either CloudWatch or the DataSync console. Now, if you want to get more hands-on experience with DataSync, we've got a number of workshops out there. You can go out to github.com. These are freely available for anyone to access. They're under our AWS-samples location in GitHub, and these are two of the ones that are out there. They're just a few dollars to run these different workshops. They give you hands-on experience, walk you through some of the things that we demoed today. And then finally, if you're looking for additional resources about DataSync, some more blogs, videos, demos, and more, go ahead and check out our product page at aws.amazon.com/datasync and head to the resources tab where you get a whole bunch of this information and more. With that, I really want to thank you for your time today. Appreciate you being here and hope you have a great day.